Tervetuloa Kasvustudioon. MTVn Kasvustudiossa keskustellaan asiantuntijoiden ja vaikuttajien kanssa siitä, miten markkinoinnilla ja mainonnalla luodaan kasvua.
The big challenge all brands face, always have faced, but they particularly face this now, is how on earth do I stand out and get noticed in a crowded marketplace to consumers who are increasingly time poor and using media that are increasingly cluttered. The time periods over we measure the outcomes of our marketing endeavours is critical to the conclusions that we come to. And the problem is that an enormous number of businesses these days measure those outcomes in the very short term, and that leads you to a set of views about how to drive growth, but it is just short-term growth. It's not the sustainable growth that you and I would seek in. And the great thing about the science of attention is it finally explains and gives us the data to understand why it is that, for instance, different video platforms have profoundly different impacts on the growth of brands.
Welcome to Kasvustudio Extra. Today we have a super special episode where we have the pleasure to welcome one of the gurus of marketing efficiency in the world joining us, Mr. Peter Field. Warm welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Great to have you. May I call you Peter?
Of course you can. Okay? Yeah. I've been called a lot worse.
Their first name is not the worst thing to be called. Peter, you have spent 15 years as a strategic planner in the advertising field, huge experience on the field, been working as a marketing consultant for over 25 years, globally known as an effectiveness expert. I think our Finnish audience may know you from the 60-40 rule, for instance, and of course from various texts, including the long and short of it. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
And as said, today we will be discussing about the effectiveness of marketing, and this is also based on research, so not as much as opinions, but actually get to the bottom of things, which is great. And hopefully we can together clarify and pinpoint the key drivers behind sustainable growth. So we have a plan in place. That sounds good?
Sounds perfect.
Marvelous. You have spent years and years on research in marketing effectiveness. What would you keep as the core principles in long-term sustainable business growth, especially when it's done through marketing?
I mean, it's a huge question. So if I can reduce it to kind of the essential property that we try to develop through product development, through the positionings that we develop, and of course also for the marketing and advertising that we then develop, I'd say it's about making that brand distinctive and stand out in its marketplace in some way. You know, the big challenge all brands face, always have faced, but they particularly face this now, is how on earth do I stand out and get noticed in a crowded marketplace to consumers who are increasingly time poor and using media that are increasingly cluttered. So it's becoming a huge challenge. How do I just cut through? And what we know is that leads you to very particular kinds of strategies, very particular views. I mean, because at the end of the day, what we need to do is to make our euro, our dollar work harder, because that's what we're going to have to do. So there are certain approaches to advertising that will help us do that. And there are, of course, certainly media usage tricks that we can learn that will help ensure that every euro that we spend will work harder. But the other big issue that we have to be aware of, and this, of course, is an issue that I think an enormous number of businesses globally have failed to grasp over the last 10 to 15 years, is that the time periods over we measure the outcomes of our marketing endeavours is critical to the conclusions that we come to. And the problem is that an enormous number of businesses these days measure those outcomes in the very short term, and that leads you to a set of views about how to drive growth, but it is just short-term growth. It's not the sustainable growth that you and I would seek in all this. If I was starting a business or running a business, I wouldn't just want to worry about this quarter. I know CEOs and CFOs face enormous pressure to deliver quarter by quarter, but you also have to balance that with ensuring that next year's trading results are likely to be better than this year's. So that's where the longer term framework comes in. And if you take that longer term framework, it leads you to a completely different set of conclusions about strategy and media that would best serve you for a longer term job than you would if you were only thinking about the short term. And so this is very dangerous. And so the short-term agenda of businesses is leading them to make long-term mistakes, whereas you have to find balance.
Do you see that the reason behind it is that the metrics and everything regarding this short-term side is more developed? Or is the pressure coming from the ownership or the top management? Or how do you see where the pressure for the marketeers is actually coming from?
I'm not sure that it's the metrics are necessarily more developed for short-term. They're much more heavily sold in and they're much easier to buy. So if I'm a CFO, I can have some reassurance that if I spend €1 on a short-term communications initiative, a piece of performance marketing, say, that I will fairly quickly know whether that worked. Did I make more than €1 back for that euro? So I get my feedback quite quickly and easily, at least I think I do, because the metrics that are served to me will give me a very quick impression. But two big problems with that I think people are unaware of. Firstly, that what you will do to deliver that will not deliver the long-term growth. We've talked about that. But secondly, the metrics that often report those short-term effects are actually misleading. Many of those sales would have happened anyway. It's just the short-term activity, the performance marketing, harvested some demand that was already there. Those consumers, those businesses as well, this is true of B2B, would have made that purchase anyway, perhaps a few days later or maybe even just a few minutes later. But we captured it through that piece of performance marketing. And therefore, that performance marketing pats itself on the back, says, well done, this was our doing. We achieved this, which of course is nonsense. There had been an enormous amount of work done prior to that point in the upper funnel, as we might call it, getting the consumer or the business to want to buy that brand to the point where many of them would have bought it anyway in time. And all you did was just the final nudge over the line. So, you know, there's a lot of what we would refer to as misattribution for these bottom of funnel metrics, which flatter those performance marketing tools and techniques and give the illusion of great power and success, which frankly they don't deserve. This is my big worry. Fake metrics will lead to false strategic thinking. You know, if you show me the metrics, I will show you the strategies. You know, it's inevitable. It's inevitable.
What about the courage of making decisions and bind yourself into that kind of story of long-term growth? I will use as an example, for instance, everyone knows, and it has been scientifically proven, that in a case of recession, you shouldn't lift your foot off the gas in if you talk about advertising. And everyone more or less knows it. Yeah. But if you look at how brands actually act on that kind of recession, that's not the case. So everyone knows what to do and no one is executing. Is there some kind of element of this same kind of thinking here, that there just isn't the courage to follow what is actually known or proven?
Is courage the right word? I think the problem is that there is a view that, yes, maybe courage is the right word. There is a safe approach, which is to go short, to go bottom of funnel. But of course, it's a slight misunderstanding. It's not really safe. It's only safe perhaps in the short term. And if you pursue that route, ultimately you jeopardize the whole base of your brand and the added value of your brand. So yes, I think in recession people panic. They always do. The advice has always been you probably can take your foot off the pedal slightly for two reasons. Some of your competitors will be doing the same. And it's really about share of voice. So you probably can get away with spending a little less. And often in recessions, media rates soften as well. So you probably can buy a bit better. So you can probably save some money. But if you panic and try and save everything, and in particular, if you move all that money that you were spending on building your brand into short term, you'll be making a huge mistake, because when you come out of recession, the brands that will really succeed are the ones that stuck with the long-term message. They're the ones that kind of clean up in recovery. So what you're really doing is your strategy needs to be based on the recovery, not the recession. And that's classic, because that's a long-term perspective. You're asking businesses to take a long-term perspective, when so many of them, I think, have been kind of pushed over the years by investors with short-term horizons to only think this quarter. But it's a huge, huge mistake. And lots of CEOs and CFOs, I don't think, understand the scale of the mistake that they make when they do that. Despite some high-profile recent confessions, we've seen Nike that went down a particular route, throwing away its massive investment, not just in communications, but in the way that company worked. That was all about the magic of Nike, the specialness of Nike. To throw all of that away in some kind of cost reduction exercise essentially was fallacy on an enormous scale. We know that now. We've had a series of these. Before that, it was Adidas who walked away from brand building. Same category. But a category in which brands are really important. And there have been others. But it seems that despite this regular stream of very high-profile warnings, we still carry on making the same mistake. So we kind of know that there is a very active sales machine going on in the background, telling people, don't listen to any of those. Those special cases. It won't happen to you. It will. It will.
If you would find yourself in a position that you are quite heavily leaning on performance marketing and you're looking a bit boost your long-term growth and have more emphasis, do you have any practical advice, what kind of things or areas to look at, or how to start putting more effort into the long-term side?
Well, I think if you look at what we know about businesses trying to scale up, startups, we know that they can get away with doing the performance marketing piece. But what you have to have are the metrics on the state of your brand. And if you're not monitoring those and you're not keeping a close eye on them, and these will be the extent to which your brand comes to mind in purchase situations, and other metrics like price elasticity, very rarely measured by businesses. This is really important, because great brands and the reward for great brand development often comes through in pricing power. You don't have to cut when you're pushed.
So isn't it so the brand is the only reason to pay anything extra if you compare something, for instance, the grocery store for instance, for the private label?
Why would I choose a more expensive brand unless it offered me something that made me feel that it was better in some way? So that is what, of course, you lack. And if you don't measure the status of your brand compared to competitors, then you'll never know what you're missing out on. And of course, this is what startup brands often don't. They are very focused on themselves and on their own journey, their own excitement. And what they fail to appreciate is that often there is a window in which they can probably very cost-effectively build their brand. They're new, they're exciting, people have an interest in them. At that point, it's quite easy to build a brand, but probably they don't yet need to. But by the time they realise they have a problem because growth has faltered, the classic startup kind of inflection point, they have very rapid early growth, and then it starts to tail off. If you leave it till that moment before you start trying to fix the problem, which is to develop your brand, often you've left it too late. Your backers may already be pulling money from you. The magic is beginning to go. You're not the new kid on the block anymore. Competitors are in there. it's going to get much more difficult. So, don't let that problem ever arise, is my advice. Don't ever believe you can get away for more than a couple of quarters with pulling your brand investment. It's a very dangerous thing to do.
So if you find yourself in a position that you have to do something, then you're late.
I think so. And, it should be a cost that businesses under pressure cut at the last. It's the very last cost they could cut. I mean, sure, we understand. Sometimes businesses, for reasons that are no fault of their own, find themselves in very tricky situations. I mean, we all knew that in COVID and many others. Yeah. In those situations, obviously, you are going to have to cut. You're going to have to cut a lot of costs. But instead of regarding marketing and communication costs as the first and easiest cost to cut, which I think a lot of businesses do, they think that there are minimal costs. Yeah, we'll sacrifice some growth, but we're not going to sacrifice our base volumes. That's the big mistake. The moment you start cutting that investment in your brand, you expose your brand to the risk and the reality of decline. So it shouldn't be a cost you cut first. Look for savings elsewhere and do the best you can to minimize the cost savings you take in marketing.
And even if you think that it would be a temporary act to play that kind of cost-cutting game, to buy that position back, it will cost you the double.
It's almost certainly going to cost you a lot more than the savings you made.
Yeah.
So you've got to really need to do it before you do it.
You have also in your research discussed quite a lot about different media channels and how they actually affect the effectiveness of marketing. What would you keep as the key factors to consider when selecting the right media mix and evaluating that what's out there for the marketers?
Well, I've become very, very interested in the attention science that is now emerging in the marketing space. I think it's a brilliant new development, and it's been around for 5 or 6 years now, but gradually building its data, building its influence, and it's got to a tipping point now where I think marketers and media owners and certainly agencies are now taking it very seriously. Yeah. And the great thing about the science of attention is it finally explains and gives us the data to understand why it is that, for instance, different video platforms have profoundly different impacts on the growth of brands. And we've kind of observed this. We've known for many decades now that TV is a fantastically effective medium for driving growth. But people, of course, in business have always thought, well, it's a video commercial. If I serve that on YouTube or on Facebook, surely it's going to be just as effective. And by the way, it looks a lot cheaper to buy on Facebook. So the assumption in the marketplace, and certainly I think amongst business leaders who perhaps don't have a background in marketing or advertising, the assumption has been that the value of a video impression served on a TV platform is probably about the same as the value of a video impression served on, say, a social media platform. The only thing that's different is the cost, and the cost of social is much lower. So the common response to that is, well, give me the cheap. I want cheap. And the market has been chasing cheap without understanding the enormous difference in commercial value of those two kinds of impressions. And the attention science now teaches us that, for instance, on social media, we may only get 1 second of someone's attention, whereas on TV, we might easily get 20. And we can do things in 20 seconds for a brand that we simply cannot achieve in 1 second. In 1 second, we can just about land a short-term message. We might just about be able to remind people of the existence of a brand, but we're never going to build or strengthen a brand for the long term. To do that, attention science teaches us, we need time. We need at least 2.5 seconds, and that's only when it starts. We need, I would argue, at least 10 seconds before we start to build a brand very powerfully. And there are not many video platforms that can deliver that, and of course TV is one of them. TV, cinema as well. Let's not forget cinema. Smaller audiences, but it's still a very powerful medium. So And that, of course, has been completely overlooked. In our obsession with cheap, we have forgotten to look for what's behind the price. And it also turns out that cheap is not cheap enough. These cheap platforms do not deliver at the level that their price implies. They actually even under-deliver against their low price point if we measure success by the long term. They're very good, they're fine for delivering this kind of short-term messages, but like I say, that only really enables us to stand still and, keep short-term sales coming through. It will not drive growth. So it's the edifice, the building that is performance marketing is built on a complete fallacy. Its foundations are weak, and it's time that building started to settle to the level that it should be. I'm not saying we shouldn't be using performance marketing. It has a very valuable role in driving short-term results and getting the most out of our investment in the brand. But we are massively over-investing in it, massively, and we have to rebalance.
So can I sense a bit of hope in the attention world? Because looking at the cross-media measurement that has been discussed, a lot of the discussion is around incremental reach and this kind of 360 holistic view on campaigns and that. But then you are more or less in a world that you are at least facing a risk of comparing apples and pears in a way. But do I sense that you are quite hopeful that attention could be there?
I am increasingly optimistic, which is why I do whatever I can to support the people who are doing the hard work in attention science, which is not me. I mean, I am a passenger on the train of attention science. I love their data. I love what they're learning, and I think it's overdue. We needed this 10 years ago. So I am optimistic that this will put right the wrongs and the misunderstandings in the business and marketing world about the value of many of the digital platforms. They have their value. They can be great amplifiers of what we can achieve on strong platforms like TV. So I would never say disinvest in them, unlike what they say about TV. They're trying to defund TV so they can take over that world. I would never say that we should pull all investment out of them, but I think it's imbalanced at the moment, and it should get back to a balance where, we use powerful media like TV to do what they're best at, which is to do the big building job, and the others then are used, for the incremental effects on top of that incrementality. And in that role, they're very valuable, but they sell themselves as being a substitute for TV, and that is just unjustified.
Would you be ready to use the attention as balancing price factor, comparing, and if we go back to the question of the media mix, would that be something that today you would use as a balancing factor in the price comparisons?
No, absolutely, definitely think we should, and I think the market is moving to that. There are technical issues and technical developments, and it's right that we should take our time trying to get the currency right, but I think attention weighting the data is extremely important. Certainly, if we look at CPM data and it's not attention weighted, I think it's worthless. Literally worthless. It misleads us. It causes us to make the wrong decisions. I think how we attention weight that data is another developing issue. I think there's lots more work to be done, but it's happening, and that's great news. That's great news.
You and your colleague Les Binet often talk about the balance between the brand building and short term, which we have also touched upon now, and I mentioned in my introduction also the 60-40 rule, which is of course quite famous. But you have mentioned now a couple of times or underlined that both are important. Could you a bit open that the reason why both are important?
So I mean, simplistically, when we invest in brand building with the right kinds of ads served on the right kinds of platforms, we are feeding the top of the funnel. We are reaching out to everyone in the category if we can afford to. We may not be able to, but we're reaching out to as many buyers in the category as we can afford to, ideally the 100%. And we are ensuring that our brand is as strong as we can in their consciousness, so when they make that purchase, we are on their radar and acceptable to them. we need to do that because if we don't feed the funnel, then at the bottom of the funnel, which is what the sales activation, the 40% is all about, is working with a brand that nobody knows, nobody likes, has no inclination to. And it is very likely, one, that you won't convert those people. Secondly, probably the only tool you will have to persuade someone who doesn't know, doesn't like, has no positive reason to want to choose you, actually choose you, is if you give them a deal and a discount. And you can't run a business discounting all day, every day. It's a recipe for commercial disaster. The whole point of the top of the funnel is to build the perceived value by the consumers so you don't have to discount it at the bottom. Then, your bottom of funnel messaging is about gathering that in. We've got their goodwill, but then so have our competitors. What we want to make sure is that we nudge them into buying us. We, at the moment of decision, we just try and serve a message that will direct them to us, whether it is a reminder or something seasonal. It's not just about reminding them of our presence. There are all sorts of time-honoured promotional techniques that could just make the little difference. And the two, so that extracts greater value from the brand marketing that we have been investing, and so it's really worth doing. But it can only work if we have that brand in our customers' heads. B2B, B2C, the same issues apply. It's a lot easier to sell a product if the brand behind it is known and trusted.
So a fight of a position inside the head, or fight for the position in the brain, or thoughts or emotions. Or
we want to get in that head. And that's, you just use the word emotions. That's another really important issue here because, I think a lot of people who particularly have come from the performance marketing world think that the way to get into people's heads is through facts and information. It's just not true. If you speak to psychologists, they'll tell you that emotions have a much more powerful grip on our behaviour. We create heuristics that can lead us to make decisions without lengthy reasoning. But also the great thing about emotional advertising and communications is it is interesting to people, even if they're not in the purchase cycle, because the ads are eye-catching and entertaining and enjoyable. I want to watch them. And the emotions come in under the radar that way, but also it's much more memorable. We remember things we liked much, much longer than we remember facts and information. I don't know about you, I forget facts really quickly.
Sometimes I think I forget everything, but some
we're
stories I do remember.
But we're in information overload, most of us, most of the time. And so we can't rely on that. Even going in, and this is Daniel Kahneman's whole thing about System 1 and System 2. If we're relying on System 2, that's our cognitive processing part of our brain, it probably will never happen because our brains are too lazy. They're too busy. They're too occupied. If I every time I went around a supermarket had to think at a System 2 cognitive level about every purchase, one, I would never get through the supermarket. I'd never get the shopping done because it takes too long. And secondly, I'd be exhausted by the end of it. I'd be ready for my bed by the end of it. The reason we have System 1 is it's a shortcut. It helps us make decisions easily. And advertising has to work with that if we want it to be as powerful as it can be. And that is what emotional advertising works. It creates these System 1 heuristics, but they're also much more memorable. That's the slam dunk of this route. More powerful in influencing decision making, lasts a long time. What else do you want? Give me that. System 1, please, every time.
Exactly. Would you talking about emotion, that kind of a capability of delivering the emotion, would you also lift the media mix type of comparison, or if you have the attention, you have the time?
Yes.
You have the open window for communication. Would you lift also when you're comparing and thinking that, okay, what kind of platform or media mix would I use, the ability to transform that emotion in my message?
So I think there are actually a number of factors here. Certainly you need a platform that can deliver the time lengths of viewing that enables you to weave these lovely emotional stories. And At its most basic, it's about a storytelling. We want to take our customer on some kind of narrative journey that they enjoy.
Yeah.
Probably will involve people and events and a story unfolding over time. That's really powerful. And we need time to do that. We can't do it in 1, 2, 3, possibly even in 5 seconds. We can remind people of it in 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. But to create those stories in the first place, we're going to need longer. So that immediately plays to the TV strength. But also, it's the context in which we find our advertising. If we serve our advertising in an either an entertaining or an engaging content. And I don't just mean entertainment. News breaks are very powerful places for advertising as well, because we are very engaged. We're watching these things because we choose to and we want to, and that's of course particularly true with on-demand TV, where we literally choose from a vast library of alternatives. Yeah. But we. In the TV platform, part of its strength is that the context in which we're serving these ads is positive, it's safe, there is no toxic or downright fraudulent or damaging kind of stuff going on around us. And that, again, enhances the effectiveness of the advertising. I mean, Marshall McLuhan said in the 1960s, the medium is the message. Yeah. And he's absolutely right. If I serve my advertising on a platform that I don't trust, that is very cluttered and noisy and full of stuff I'm probably trying to avoid, it will be less effective than if I serve that ad on a platform that is of my choosing, the content is what I like, I'm not being fed stuff that I find toxic in any way. So these are all really important things, and the trust we place in well-regulated TV platforms, particularly as we have in Europe, with good content and good investment in programming, is the kind of environment that breeds trust. And it's long been known that, people often say of their brands as seen on TV, and they say that because they know a consumer will think, well, if these people have been advertising on TV, there's a confidence that goes with that, but also a trust that goes with that, because they would never have got away with it. So all of these things, these are huge strengths of not only of TV, a lot of legacy media share this, but these are great strengths that are not a given in many of the digital platforms.
Yeah,
and
of course, performance marketing.
Many of the environments on digital platforms are now quite frankly really quite toxic.
What's your situational outlook on the 60-40% rule being executed in the market? Is there a difference between big brands and small brands, for instance, or what is your evaluation? And are companies doing what you're preaching?
Here's the interesting thing. I know, I don't fool myself. A lot of companies are ignoring this. A lot of companies, particularly in the US, think this is all nonsense. They think that it is all about short-term cash flow and that's all that matters. So I don't for a moment think this battle has been won. But here's the interesting thing is that more and more often the case studies of effectiveness, the ones that have had big effects in their marketplace that come through, are absolutely going by the 60-40 playbook. And many of them say, this is a reason why we've been successful. We got back to balance. So I talked about the previous Grand Prix winner in the UK Effectiveness Awards from 2 years ago, which was Mondelez, as well as this year's Grand Prix winner, which is McCain's, a frozen food brand. Now, they commit heavily to brand, not always 60-40, because 60-40 is an average. It depends what category you're in. Yeah. In some categories, you need to up the 60, and in others, you need to down the 60 a little bit. So 60-40 was only ever an average, and we've always said that. But you need to find your own sweet spot. But both of these brands found their sweet spot, and they worked it, and they had huge results as a result of it. So I think it's a long, hard slog. I don't think we're ever going to win this battle, because time and time again, people seem to keep on making the same mistakes, as we were saying earlier, because there is a very aggressive, well-funded sales machine that's constantly out there saying, go short, go short, go short. So we just have to provide an antidote to that and try and drag people back to balance.
What about the SME segment? Is that something where the brand building gets tougher, or it's a harder sell, or?
Well, again, my colleague Les Benet and I, we've done a lot of work recently with the B2B case studies in the IP database, and they're a minority, but there's a growing number of them. We know we've got between 60 and 70 case studies. It's a small group now, but we've got very rich data within those. So we can, with reasonable confidence, say that the same rules about balance of brand and activation apply in B2B, that brand is very important, certainly at the SME level of B2B, which, if you think about it, makes sense. Small businesses, the proprietor, he's not an expert in all the kinds of things he has to buy. No. He doesn't have teams of people in procurement to help him. He or she is making this decision in the same way that consumers largely do. They're pushing it on kind of gut feel. Which kind of company does he want to do business with? Yeah. So, we know that brand works powerfully amongst SMEs, but there's also good evidence to say that it also helps significantly at the enterprise level in B2B, because it makes the whole sales team's job easier. If the customer at the end of the day, whether they're in procurement or the end user within the businesses, they have a greater confidence and belief in that brand. It just takes the pressure off the sales team and makes their job easier. Yeah. So there's good evidence at all levels of business that brand helps, and that there is an issue of balance between brand and short-term sales, activation, performance marketing, whatever it is, to be found. In B2B, it's shifted slightly from B2C. Instead of a 60-40, it's more of a 45-55, so it's slightly flipped. Yeah. But it still means you need to invest in your brand. And there's some great new effectiveness case studies coming through from the world of B2B, again, of companies who've said, we did it, it worked.
Yeah. Is it, if there are exceptions, or let's say there are someone is a bit, let's say, not buying the theory, is the argument always that, yes, but it doesn't work in our case, or it doesn't work in our industry, or it doesn't work in our
geography.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll always get that. And, we've been mining our database for years. Other people have mined other databases, and what? We've never found any major exceptions to any of these findings. And you would think if there were so many of these exceptions out there, we would have found them by now. Slight nuancing of some of the sweet spots and some of the detail of the rules, but fundamentally the principles apply no matter what you're doing. So I don't buy that. It's just an excuse for people who don't want to look at the evidence to try and find a way of avoiding having to face the facts. And the facts are, it's worth doing this.
Yeah. Let's try to have a small look at the crystal ball. And it might be that the answer from your part is attention, but are there something in the near future regarding the development of the real effectiveness as what you're talking about, that you're now looking forward to, or optimistic about, or that, hey, after 2-3 years, it seems that things are going to a perfect place? What are these kind of positive things that you see in the near future?
Well, I mean, obviously I'm biased. I do think the attention debate is going to bring about a reevaluation of media value. So I'm very positive about that. So I think that is going to build momentum and continue. And I'm hoping that will reach a kind of tipping point where we start to become much more evidence-based, where marketers don't just partially cherry-pick little bits of evidence that support prejudice they have, but they take a much more holistic view about the driving of effectiveness, short and long, and take, and open their minds to the truths that are out there. So, I that will start at the top. It will start at the more sophisticated blue chip businesses out there. And it's already happening. It is already beginning to happen. But there is an enormously long tail of mediocre marketing around the world. And we have to work that message down. So I'm optimistic that it will make progress. Yeah. And I think that will change the way people think about media and the way, hopefully, the media platforms themselves think. At the very least, I think if the commercial pressures, particularly on the algorithm-driven businesses, make them realize the value of a certain quality of environment and kind of attention, then we might find a lot less toxic and distressing kind of material on many of these platforms. It's not good for society, and it's not good for people in society. And I think, marketing and the pressures of marketing can be part of the pressure in putting this right. So I would encourage all marketers to think about the broader issues, because ultimately it's good for them as businesses, but also, do we really want to kill off the platforms, particularly the legacy platforms that are so important to healthy minds, healthy society, and healthy democracy?
Yeah.
The risk is we kill off the businesses that actually defend our democracies by keeping people informed of truth and reality. And that is playing with fire.
Yeah.
No business should want that. It's the rule of the jungle when that happens, not the rule of law and order that business thrives on. So think very, very seriously before you defund publisher media that keep an honest, trustworthy, fact-based news agenda out there. These are huge issues. These are survival issues.
I was about to ask that the near future fear that you have, or something that gives you a bit of anxiety, but it is exactly the development that you're worried about.
High stakes here. This is not just about the success of brands and the businesses that own them, though heavens enough, that's important enough. What's going on in the world of media at the moment is vitally important to the health and existence of our democracies. So, the stakes are enormous. And I think we are sleepwalking into this. We have to wake up and realize what's going on and not be pushed ever further down this route of funding a small number of mega businesses who have no real interest in, true news as opposed to feel news.
One question regarding the tension side and a bit on the long-term business growth that I almost forgot, but I thought when you were describing the tension world, is that do we still need to be developing the link between the brand metrics you mentioned and the business growth? I think in research we see that link, for instance, regarding baseline sales growth is there. But is that something we need to make more visible, or is that something alongside attention on the crystal ball that we could achieve and make things a bit easier in decision making?
No, absolutely. And I think there is a disconnect, certainly in the C-suite of lots of companies, between brand metrics, which are often viewed as kind of like vanity metrics, and hard business results. And we know there is linkage. Give them their credit. The Ehrenberg Bass Institute do a lot of work on this. What they refer to as mental availability and the link between that and business success. The data I work with, again, we can see that strong link. We have to better communicate that, and particularly we need to get this message into business schools and, finance schools, so that the kinds of people who run our companies are exposed to this in their formative years, so they don't come out just thinking that, brand is something we did in the last millennium. It's not. It's of no value to businesses. I would have hoped they would have got there themselves just by the application of logic, but there are some seductive countersells. So I think we need to do more outreach on this and get this into business schools and universities. And that is happening. It is beginning to happen. And if certainly those who are in academia were working to help promote this rather than perhaps just defending their own point of view, then we might accelerate it. I think we all need to work together on these kinds of issues to get the message out. Rather than, there's been some unwelcome infighting between people who are all on the side of brand, but trying to sort of pick fights with one another on whether they have the better answer or not. Fundamentally, we are essentially agreeing more with each other than we disagree. We need to unify our points of view and message and amplify them and get them out there to the business community as strongly as we can.
Peter, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you in our growth studio, which is Kasvustudio. It's growth studio in English. As a guest, we are super honored to have you, and thank you for sharing your thoughts, and also thank you for on behalf of our audience behind the screens also.
Well, thank you.
This is not an everyday content and discussion we can have in the Finnish market with such a efficiency superstar as yourself. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And it's been lovely to lit off a bit of steam with you here today.
I have a safe space for that.
I hope you didn't frighten the audience.
No, I'm sure not. No, this is an absolute perfect place to do that.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.